We're here at the Women's Forum in Deauville with Monica Kaiser, Head of Social Policy at the OECD. Welcome to INSEAD Knowledge.
Thank you very much.
Pensions seem to be the problem that governments don't want to face. But with aging populations and little or no growth, how do you see this playing out?
In fact, a lot of OECD countries have been reforming pensions. We've seen a real movement starting in the early 90s where countries have been realizing that there is a demographic time bomb ahead and that they needed to do something about it. So starting at that point in time, they began to reform quite seriously their pension systems. The majority of countries have been increasing retirement ages, for example. They have made the access to early retirement schemes more difficult, meaning that you can still take early retirement, but you have to make do with a much smaller benefit because you get increments or decrements depending on the time you retire. A couple of countries have also been seriously reducing benefit levels, and so we know that many countries now are on a path to much more sustainable pensions. And in fact, some countries have gone so far that actually the big risk for the future is more one of pension adequacy than of financial sustainability of pension systems.
And what countries are those?
One example is Germany. Germany has massively reformed the pension system and put it on a very financially sustainable path. They have what they call a points system. That means every year you contribute to the pension system, you earn points. And these points are then converted to a pension benefit by multiplying them with a pension value. And this pension value is now linked to a number of indicators, including the ratio between pensioners and contributors, which means that as the population ages and that there are less contributors for an increasing number of pensioners, the pension benefit will fall. So since there is a very strong link between contributions and benefits in the German pension system, we are concerned that in the future there might be an increase in old age poverty. And there are a number of other European countries that move to a much stronger link between contributions and benefits, which in a sense is a good thing because it motivates longer work. Every year that you work longer, you increase your benefit. But at the same time, if you remove redistribution from the system, people who have very low earnings are going to have very low pensions. And that might pose a risk of old age poverty in the future.
There is more and more social discontent all over Europe at the moment. How do you think that governments can push through difficult reforms in the current social climate?
At the moment, the social climate is particularly difficult. There's no doubt about that. And it's not only the social climate that's difficult, it's the economic climate that's difficult. The prime concern at the moment, everywhere, or in the majority of OECD countries at the moment, is jobs. Jobs, jobs, jobs. We've been seeing so many people at all ages losing jobs, but we have a particular situation here that, contrary to previous recessions, it is young people who are very much hit by this recession. Young people are not finding jobs, are becoming unemployed, and this is a very serious and risky situation as there is a risk of long-term scarring. I think we have to look at the current economic situation in a long-term and in a short-term perspective. In the long-term, structural reforms are needed in many countries, and not only in the social sectors, not only in the pension systems, but also in other areas of the economy. And the crisis can be a good time also to address some of these concerns. But in the short term, there's no way one can just cut public social spending, and particularly for those people who have just lost their jobs, because these people have no other resort. So it's very clear that you cannot really save money in that short term.
Many people that had private pension schemes saw their life savings wiped out. How are governments going to cope with these additional demands on resources?
In many European and OECD countries, there was indeed quite some private saving built up to complement for public retirement systems which were already relatively low. You can see that in countries like the UK, but also in countries like Australia or New Zealand, in Canada and the US, there was more private saving for retirement. Now, these savings have not been wiped out, but they have been reduced. But now we are looking at the assets and how much it's recovered in the meantime, and we're almost back to the levels that we had in 2008. Now this of course means that there's 2 or 3 years of lost savings here. And those people who are close to retirement at that point in time have lost money. And for them it was particularly serious. For younger people, the situation was not quite as bad because they're not going to need access to the saving immediately. And so there's not going to be necessarily such a big burden on governments to make up for those losses. But I think what has happened is that there's been a serious rethink on how people should structure their savings over the life cycle, because it is not a good idea for somebody who is close to retirement, say starting 55, 60, to have 100% of their savings in equity. It is just not a good idea unless they're prepared to postpone their retirement substantially if something happens. So many governments are now trying to devise ways to slowly transition from one form of savings, from more risky forms of savings, which can be good for younger people, into more safe instruments as people age. That is one of the consequences of policy. Also, I'd like to add to that it's interesting, those countries that were always convinced that private pensions were not a good idea because they felt that one was playing with savings that were needed for the well-deserved retirement, these countries have been become more convinced in that position. Countries that were always reserving a large part for private pensions have not put that into question fundamentally. They say we need to regulate better, we need to build in more checks and balances, but nobody was prepared to throw private pensions out of the window.
Monica Kaiser, thank you for being with us here on INSEAD Knowledge.
Thank you.